Okay friends, the final video. So if you haven't watched any of the prior ones, I very highly recommend you do so, otherwise a lot of this is probably not going to make heaps of sense. You probably could follow along, but there's a few finer points in the last video, especially in regards to getting this particular thing working. So now we've already created the GUI side of things, we've created the rectangle, the selection box. Now we actually need to code in so that we can actually select the units within that box when you release the mouse button. So this is actually going to be pretty straightforward. We don't need to change anything in the scene. We're going to use the click and the click on scripts that we've already created, and we're just going to edit them a little bit to make this function work. Hopefully as well we should be able to retain the existing functionality, so the clicking and the control and all of that should continue to work. So we'll get into it straight away. I won't stuff around too much. There's our select box script, which is still there. We don't need to worry about that. I'm going to go to the click script first of all. So this is the one that we're doing the majority of the work from. This is where we're actually doing the clicking. This is attached to the camera in the scene. We need to change things a little bit. So let's see, what do we need to work with? The first thing I'll do, I'm probably going to add a few more variables that we're going to need. So first of those, we're going to need a list, and it needs to be public as well, because the objects, any selectable objects when they are created, when they spawn into the scene or are instantiated on start, they are going to add themselves to this list so that we know which objects are in the scene, and we can iterate through this list to be able to select them. You'll see that happening soon. So we're going to create a public list. That list is going to contain game objects. We'll call it selectable objects. So this is the list of objects that can be selected. We're going to create two vector 3s as well. mousepos1 and private vector 3 mousepos2. There we go. Alright, cool. Alright, I'm going to change the start function too. I'm going to actually change this to awake rather than start, because we want these lists to initialize themselves before the start function runs on the selectable objects themselves. Because if these objects exist in the scene when the game has started, they're going to try and add themselves to the list straight away, and if it hasn't initialized properly, you're going to get errors and it's not going to work. So it's just safer to have the initialization of these lists in the awake function as opposed to the select. So we already have the selected objects list in there. We're just going to add the selectable objects as well. Selectable objects is equal to a new list of game objects, exactly the same as above, just using a different list here. That's all we need for the awake function. Okay, we're going to change things up a little bit. So currently we're doing two checks here. So you might remember from one of the previous videos or in this script, when you hit the right mouse button, it actually clears the currently selected objects, and we're doing that twice. So we do it here once in the right mouse button, but we also do it again. Where is it? Here in the when you're clicking the left mouse button, just to clear that selection so that you can select a new object. That to me tells me we should probably have this in its own method or function. So I'm just going to cut that. We're going to come down here to the very end. I think that's the very end. No, yep, that's it. And under the update function, we're just going to say void clear selection. Sounds pretty good. And we're just going to dump all that straight in there. So rather than running all this and doing all this, we're just going to put it in its own function. We're just going to call that function instead. It should just make life a little bit easier. So if we just copy that, I'll come back up to the right mouse button up here, put that in. So if you click the right mouse button, it's just going to run that function, and it's going to do exactly what it was doing already, just keeping it separate to make it a bit neater. And we can probably do the same as well at that other point. So where was that? That was here. And we'll just say, yep, clear selection again. Same thing. And we'll leave everything else there under it. I think that's all we need. Yep, cool. Alright, so that's the first change, just tidying up a little bit there. Now let's get into some of the good stuff. So we've got the input get mouse button down, so when the player clicks, when they press the button down, first of all, the one major change we need to make in this is we need to store the position. So when the player first presses that mouse button down, regardless of whether they're going to hold it down or not, we're just going to grab the position of the mouse when they do it. We're going to do it as a viewport point. So we're going to say that mousepos1 is equal to camera.main.screen to viewport point. So this is essentially the screen viewport, the viewport I believe is just a number between sort of 0 and 1. I'd recommend sort of Googling it just to have a bit of a look and so you can understand how this function works. But essentially what we're doing is taking the mouse position, converting it from a screen into a viewport vector instead. So and we're going to use input.mousePosition to do that. Nice and straightforward. So we've got the first position for the mouse. So this is going to be the start of our selection rectangle for actually selecting the objects. And it should hopefully line up with the GUI rectangle we've already got. So we've got the mousepos1. Just quickly checking. I think that's all we need to do in there. Where is it? Don't have it yet, so I'm going to code this function up. So also in the update method, just under the get mouse button down, which I believe should be there, it is, we're going to do an if input.getMouseButton up. So when the player releases the mouse button, what are we going to do? We're going to grab the second position. So we're going to say mousepos2 is equal to camera.main.screen to viewport point, exactly the same as we did before, and input.mousePosition. So we've got the first point for our selection, and now we have the second point when the player releases the mouse. We're going to do a quick check as well that I believe should help us eliminate starting a drag selection if all we're doing is clicking. So basically if mousepos1 does not equal mousepos2, so if the second position is different to the first position, so in theory if the player has only clicked, unless they bumped the mouse or whatever, it shouldn't matter too much, it's not that noticeable, but if the two positions are different, then what we're going to do, we'll create our own function that we'll call select objects, and that doesn't exist yet. Don't do that to me. Select objects. There we go. Now we don't have that yet, so it's complaining. We're going to put that here after update. We're going to put it above the void clear selections. So we will say void select objects. There we go. That should keep that happy now. Cool. Okay, so this is going to be the good stuff. This is where we're actually getting to doing the selection. So bear with me for a bit because it's going to be a bit strange. The first thing we're going to do is create a new list of game objects. And we'll call it rem objects or remove objects. So what this list is going to be used for is new list game objects. So we're just initializing that. There we go. So when we actually go through the list of selectable objects, which we will be doing soon, what we want to do is actually, because you can't add and remove to a list when you're iterating through it, we're going to create a second list, and I think this behavior is in one of my other tutorials as well, so you might be familiar with it and you might have used this before, but it won't let you add and remove while you're iterating. So what you have to do is, if you come across any objects in the selectable objects list that we created earlier, and if those objects are null or if anything has happened to them that's going to cause errors in our script, what we're going to do is add them to this rem objects list, and then once we finish iterating through the first list, we're just going to remove any of the objects in this list from the first list, because that's not confusing at all. Anyway, and we're also going to use the control key as well, so we want that to work. So we'll say input.getKey. So if the player is holding down the left control key, same as we used before, because we also want that sort of multiple selection to happen. So you could select one group of units, hold the control key, and then select an entirely different group of units, and we'll group them all together. As you might be familiar with that if you play RTS games, and most games that use that kind of function. So actually what we'll say is, if the left control key is held, if it's not held down, sorry. So if we're not holding the control key, because this is going to work better, all we're going to do is, before we do any of the calculations, we're just going to clear the selection. So if the player is not holding the left control key, we want to treat this as an entirely new selection of units. So the first thing we'll do is clear any existing selection. Now that we've done that, we're going to create a few more things, and I'll just scroll down a bit so we can get this on view. We're going to say we're going to create a new rect object, and we'll call it, I don't know, select rect. This just being like a invisible rectangle, I guess. It's going to be a new rect, and its position, or sort of its boundaries, I guess. It's, what would you say? Well, we're defining its position and its size. And what we're going to do is we'll say mousepos1 for that mousepos. Oh, hang on, what am I doing? Mousepos1.x. Mousepos1.y. So what is that? That's the, yeah, so that's its position, I believe. So that's, you know, where on the left and where on the, so where it is on the screen horizontally and where it is on the screen vertically, so X and Y. And we're using the first, so we want to start this square, so its position, its top left corner, I believe, will be at the mouse position that we defined when we clicked the mouse, which makes sense. That's where we want the rectangle to start from. So we've got that. Now for its width and its height, this is actually going to be pretty easy. All we're going to do is say mousepos2.x, so the second mouse position .x minus mousepos1.x, and we'll do the same for y, mousepos2.y minus mousepos1.y. So it's just getting the size of that rectangle based on the differences between the two positions. Nice and easy. Now we're going to start a for each loop. And this is where we're going to start iterating through the selectable objects, so we can actually see which objects out of the entire list of our selectable objects are actually going to fall within this rectangle. So now that we've defined where the rectangle is and how big it is, we're actually going to see what's within it. And this is actually a lot more easy than I think we ever would have thought it would be. So game object, select object, we'll say. So for each game object that we are calling select object in the selectable objects list, for each one, what are we going to do? We're going to say, all right, well, if the select object, there it is, does not equal null, so if it's still a valid object, if it still exists, which unless it's been destroyed, it should, we're going to do a quick check, and we're going to say select object, select rect, so that rectangle we created, does it contain? So select rect dot contains, and what we're going to do, we're going to say camera dot main, dot world to viewport point. Oh god, I hate that word. And we are going to use the position of the select object. So select object dot transform dot position. And we need one more parameter, and that is we're going to say true. So as you can see from the description there, so when you're using the contains function, what you're doing is basically saying, okay, within the rect that I've created, is this position within it? And the true or false, or if you leave it out, I think it's just false by default, basically will tell it, is it going to matter if the rect is using negative values? So which we do want that to, we want it to work that way, because we don't necessarily know if the player is dragging the rectangle left, right, up, down, whatever. We want it to behave exactly the same regardless of whether it's in minus values or not. And that true parameter there will actually do that. It tells it to ignore any negative values and just behave normally. And I've left something out. I need a second bracket there. I believe, yep, that should do the trick. Now I'll just cover something again real quick. So when we're doing the contains as well, you might notice we use this world to viewport point. All that's doing is basically converting the position of the object in the world into the viewport, into its position within the viewport. So similar to how we did before when we did screen to viewport point, we're just keeping the values consistent, so it just makes it a lot easier to do those checks, and it also allows us to do it from the screen or the viewport itself as opposed to trying to do it within the world. So it just keeps things a lot more simple. Within this check, so if the object actually is within the rectangle, so if we have dragged the rectangle and it covers one of our objects, and that object is in the selectable objects list, what we're going to do is we are going to say selected objects, so that's the list we've been using this whole time, the list of objects that are currently selected, and we're going to add this object, add select object. As always, my wording is absolutely atrocious, or the naming, so I apologize if it's confusing. But so we've found that our object does fall within the rect, so we're adding it to the selected objects list, and then we're going to basically run those functions that we were doing before. So we'll say select object get component. What was the script again? It was click on. So we're getting the click on script. Currently selected is going to equal true, same as we did before. And we're also going to tell it to run the click me function. So you could tidy this up, and you can only reference it once, similar to how I've shown you in the previous videos. But I'm just keeping it simple. So, oops, we don't want that to be a double equals, we want it to be a single equals. That's why it's complaining. There you go, nice and easy. So if the object does fall within the rect, what we are doing is adding it to the selected objects list. We are telling it that it is currently selected, and then we're telling it to run the click me function, which will turn it green to represent the fact that it's selected. Nice and easy. And I don't know why that's there, just tidy that up. Okay, so that's nice and easy. Now, what about if the object is null? So as we discussed before, let's say we're going through this list, and it's the list of our selectable objects, and between the last check and this check, something's happened to the object. It's been destroyed or whatever, and it's now null. So if it's null and we were to run this or continue to run all this on that object, it's going to give us errors. We're going to get null reference errors because these components aren't going to exist anymore. So we need to do a check to ensure that the object still exists, which is what we're doing. So if the object does happen to be null, if something's happened to it, we're going to add it to that rem objects list that we created before. And we'll do that simply, remObjects.add select object. Cool. So now that we've done that, now that we've actually finished iterating through that list, we now need to go through the rem objects list. So if anything in there is null, we need to now basically say, alright, cool, now remove it from the original list. We don't need it anymore, so get rid of it. And as I mentioned before, if you tried to remove it while you were iterating through the list, you'd get errors and it would complain. So we're not going to do it within the for each loop. We're going to do it after the for each loop by using a second list. So if remObjects.count, so if there are actually objects in that remObjects list, because we don't need to do this if there's not. If none of the objects are null, it's not going to matter, so it won't have anything in it. For each, again, so if there's objects in the rem objects, for each one, game object rem, we'll just call it, in rem objects. So for every game object in that list, all we're going to do is say selectable objects.remove rem, and yep, that's all we need to do there. And just after the for each loop, we're just going to, we're going to say remObjects.clear, just to remove or to clear that list out. Otherwise, it'd just keep accruing null objects for the entirety of the time. That's all there is to it. That is all we need to do in this script to get that working. We do need to change one more thing in the click on script, so the script attached to each selectable object. So we'll go to that. And within the, well, what do we need to do? Where do we need to do it? Just having a quick look, sorry. Okay. Yep, alright, here, let's do it here. Because the script is attached to the camera, because the click script is attached to the camera, we can cheat a little bit. We'll just say camera.main.gameObject.getComponent. And we're going to access the click script. And we're going to say selectable objects.add this.gameObject. So when the object starts, it's going to find the camera, it's going to find the game object of the camera, it's going to get the click script, and it's going to add the object to the selectable objects list so that we know this object, any object with the click on script attached to it, is a selectable object, and it should work. It should work with our drag, the drag rectangle thing we're doing. Now, obviously this would be different. If you didn't have the click script attached to your camera, you couldn't do it this way. You'd need to create a, you'd need to basically find the object in some way, shape or form, or perhaps get a reference to it in another way. So if you don't have it attached to your camera, you can't use the camera.main.gameObject method, but I'm hoping you should be pretty familiar with just sort of other ways you could access that object. Like you could do a gameObject.find if it's attached to like a manager object, or if it's attached to a player object or whatever. You just need to access the game object in some way and then get the click script and go from there. I'm hoping you should be pretty good with that. If you have any questions, let me know. We can cover it. And that's all there is to it. So we've done that. When the object is created, it's going to add itself to the selectable objects list, which is like a master list of any objects that are in the scene that are selectable. And as we sort of saw when we were writing this, that's the list it's going to use to check which objects are currently within the rectangle and which ones aren't. Now it may seem, unless you're working with hundreds and hundreds of objects, this should be fine. You shouldn't really, I wouldn't imagine you're going to get any performance problems with this. Like I said, if you start looking at having hundreds of objects on screen at once and you're trying to use this, you may have a bit of a problem, in which case you're going to need to start looking at some more advanced methods of doing it, like using frustrums and calculating points, like firing multiple raycasts, that sort of thing. But just for what we're doing here, unless you're sort of getting to that point, this should be perfectly fine. This should be more than sufficient. I believe that's all there is to it. Like last time, I've probably forgotten something or another, but I think that should just work. So let's give it a quick test. Let's go into Unity. Just scroll that back a bit. It is ready to maximize. Now that script is already attached to our camera. We've already got the select box script attached to it too. Should be ready to go. Let's give it a test. And if we... There we go. Look at that. And if we hold the control key, we can select multiple. If we right click, it still clears them. And it should continue to, everything else should continue to work as per normal. And that really is all there is to it, guys. The only other thing worth mentioning, so this method actually, it uses the, the pivot point, I believe it is, of the object. So depending on where that is on the object, you may find it behaves a bit differently. So if we sort of just, oops, don't click on it, that doesn't help, but if we sort of just select it there, you notice it's not working. But if we get a bit closer to the pivot point, which I believe on the square is in the center, on a cube is in the center, you'll notice it sort of works. So we could probably, yeah, like so. I mean, there's probably other ways you could tidy this up, other things you could do, ways you could achieve this, but just from some testing I was doing, this sort of seems to be the most simple way to do it. And like I said, it doesn't seem to have any performance issues that I've encountered so far. Might change when you're working with hundreds of objects, but you know, if you're getting to that point, I'm guessing your game's probably going to need some more advanced functions anyway. Ideally though, this should achieve 99% of the functions you need. I'm hoping this should be easily adaptable to any sort of RTS or whatever kind of games you're working on. I'd appreciate any feedback you might have. If you found it helpful in any way, then please, hey, let me know. I'd love to hear how you got it working and what you've managed to achieve with it. And as always, if you did like this video, if you got anything out of it, please like and subscribe and come back later to check out if we've got any more. Thanks guys, I'll see you next time.